Hey everybody, and welcome to a special edition here on How It's Played. Today I have a very special guest with us. He's going to talk about the upcoming Pathfinder Remaster Project, and that is Michael Sayre. He is the design manager at Paizo, and Michael, to get us rolling here, maybe can you share a little bit with the audience of what exactly a design manager does, and what's your role with the Pathfinder Remaster Project?
Yeah, so as a design manager, I am kind of the exact percentage varies a little bit depending on what's going on, but in general, I'm kind of like a 50-50 split between a team manager for the rules and lore team, and then also I am an active designer myself working on the products and stuff that we make. So my team includes the people who report to me include my creative director, Luis Loza, my senior designer, James Case, senior developer, Eleanor Farron, senior developer, Jason Keeley, and my non-senior developer, Landon Winkler. And then my kind of boss is Jason Bowman, the director of game design at Paizo. And then Logan Bonner, the lead designer on the team, is kind of my peer. So Logan is very much in charge of kind of the final call on any ruling that we make or any decision we make about how we implement a rule that goes to Logan. Uh, who is going to be working on a book and making sure that they have the time and everything to do that? That's kind of on me. And so that's kind of how those responsibilities split. Logan's primary responsibility is always taking care of the cohesiveness and the health of the game. And my responsibility is taking care of the cohesiveness and the health of the team that makes the game.
Okay. In talking about who does the books, I know you were very heavily involved with Guns and Gears and with the Treasure Vault. Anywhere else that you put your stamp on, or you were heavily involved in?
Oh, I've done work on quite a few different projects. Everybody on the design team kind of touches all of the books that we work on. That's just the nature of it. Whenever there's a new class, every designer on the team generally does a full pass on the class. And so pretty much every class, starting with Secrets of Magic, I at least kind of got a little bit of some fingerprints on. Guns and Gears, obviously, I was the primary designer for the Gunslinger class, and pretty much that whole guns section of the book. Although again, Mark and I were kind of co-leads because that was my first book on the design team, and so he did the inventor, I did the gunslinger. There were some little bits in the gears section that I worked on, and some little bits in the guns section that he worked on, and we both kind of helped polish each other up and inform each other. Treasure Vault, I wrote pretty much all of the Pereperin and Velashinaz quotes, all of the introductions, all of the sidebars, all of those things, as well as the weapons, the non-magical weapons section, and quite a few items that are kind of sprinkled all over the place. I've also worked with the Lost Omens team quite a bit. In Lost Omens Legends, I did the write-up on Nonku, the Linorm king, who is a Varki. He's not an Ulfin Linorm king. In Monsters of Myth, I did the very first monster, Aina Maren, who then also became a spoiler. I almost said something. He is related to a recent AP, and I will say no more so I don't ruin anything for people.
Good save.
Well, it's hard. It's hard to talk about what I do without accidentally spoiling something somewhere.
We won't mind. We'll forgive you if you let a few things slip during this broadcast, especially about the remaster project, because
Yeah.
that's what everybody's here to hear about. So obviously you're involved in that, and what's your role in this like grand sweeping? I don't want to say redesign, this tweaking of the rules that we're already used to.
Yeah, so a lot of my job is just making it happen and making sure everybody at the company understands what is happening and that we're all kind of moving in the same direction with this. We've been pretty open about the fact that we were not, we had an idea that we would be doing something like this maybe sometime in the future back in 2022, right? Like, sooner or later there'll probably be, Pathfinder First Edition had Pathfinder Unchained, so we had a kind of general idea of like at some point in time we might want to open up the patient and make some tweaks and adjustments that are uh kind of within the scope of errata, but sometimes just a little bit more robust than what we normally do in errata. And then January, I think it was about January 16th or so, the internet and the entire tabletop RPG communities exploded in a huge way. And we made the decision that, as a company, we really need to put ourselves in a position where we are not reliant on the whims of another company as far as our, stability and the sanity of our employees goes. And so we started this very ambitious undertaking of the core remaster. We had 4 books. They've all been great books that have been well received. The core rulebook, the advanced player's guide, the game mastery guide, and the first bestiary book. And the core remaster kind of takes the content of those 4 books and breaks it up in a different way. Player core 1 is, kind of a lot of the primary player stuff from the core rulebook, 8 of the classes, and then a lot of the just how do you get into the game and start playing information. Player core 2 is the rest of the core rulebook and APG classes, as well as the supporting materials that go along with those. GM Core is basically just kind of a streamlined and updated version of the Game Mastery Guide. And then Monster Core 1 is a remix of monsters to create a kind of new stable leg for the game. The point of the first bestiary is to make sure you have enough monsters to play an entire game of Pathfinder start to finish with a good amount of variety and support at every level of the game. With the OGL things that came up and our decision that, we don't even want to mess with the OGL anymore. We don't want to put ourselves in any kind of risk if the terms of that license, were to ever change. That means that book is going to be bringing in some new monsters to fill in some slots for monsters that we've decided we just don't want to, have the risk of continuing to try and use in the game right now. So as far as new content that people have never seen before, that Monster Core is probably going to be really the newest of these books. It's going to have the most stuff that people just, maybe aren't expecting or have just never seen a version of. The other books are all kind of more errata passes, things we'd like to do, but we didn't really have the opportunity because changing, thing X would also mean changing thing Y, and maybe that was out of scope. A lot of contingencies between the core rulebook and the APG, for example, right? Because I think to really fully experience Pathfinder, those 2 books together kind of encapsulate the primary core experience. So that remixing continued, right? Player core 1 is going to have classes like the fighter, and it's going to have everything that the fighter had in the core rulebook. It's going to have all of the good stuff that the fighter had in the APG all put together in one place. So a player kind of wanting to sit down and getting that core fighter experience will really have a full picture of what that class looks like and what they can do with it. And while we're in there, we're taking the opportunity to just kind of, put a little spit and polish on things. I think most of the classes are going to get at least a new feat or 2. Classes that had things that were maybe a little unclear in their presentation before. We've done what we can to make the presentation flow a little smoother, make it more intuitive. A lot of it is, we've called it a remaster internally. We've also kind of referred to it as a remix, right? Because the notes are all the same. We're just kind of changing the order that they drop it in, Yeah, so that's what it is. It's kind of taking all the things that people have loved about Pathfinder 2nd Edition up to this point and doing what we can to make them even more accessible to this big wave of new players that we see coming into the game, and taking that opportunity at the same time to make sure all of these books run off of our ORC license, which means that third-party companies who want to get in on the ORC and start producing under it are going to have this as a stable rule set for them to start branching off of.
Fantastic. Well, I know everybody out there, they've submitted questions. We collected a bunch of questions over the Pathfinder 2E subreddit. And I guess before we get into this, I should probably just let everybody know that as much as Michael and I would love to say that we're going to be able to go through every single question that was submitted, the response to the call for questions was far greater than I really anticipated. So we have a limited amount of time, so we're not going to be able to get to every single one of them. And also, some of the things that were submitted maybe were a little bit outside of the scope of what we wanted this conversation to be. And I'm sure there's a few questions that were very, very, very specific that may not be suitable for this conversation. But in a couple of weeks, there's PaizoCon, and that might be the venue where the company wants to make very specific announcements. But with that said, there's still plenty of questions that were submitted that are within the scope. And I'm just going to start throwing them to you, Michael, and we'll get through as many as our time allows. And I guess we got a lot of questions that were about the classes that are being tweaked. And rather than going through the minutia of each class and how it's being changed, maybe can you give us a bird's eye view, a grand look at what the design process was, what your thinking was for designing or redesigning or tweaking or remixing these classes as a whole? What can you share about the changes coming to the classes?
Yeah. So, to kind of start with, one of the big things that was, kind of a North Star for this process was that nobody's character should disappear, between the current version of Pathfinder 2nd Edition and what is available to them when the remaster books come out. There are going to be some instances where maybe something was an OGL specific term or an OGL specific construction, and we've had to try to swap that out. But we've tried to make sure that if you were to describe your character in a paragraph using the post-remaster and the pre-remaster versions of the class, that would be the same paragraph, right? We didn't want to take anything away from anybody. If we were going into this, what we really wanted to do was provide more options and more opportunities, or take things that were a little clunky and try to streamline them and make them more accessible to players. We've said many times, like, this isn't a 2.5, right? I've seen the conversation. I think the one that I think always kind of appeals to me the most is when people are like, it's more like a 2.1. And I'm like, yeah, if you think of, like, the core rulebook has had 4 errata waves up to this point, about one a year, maybe not in exactly that smooth pacing, then maybe it was like 2.01, 2.02, 2.03, right. 2.04, and this is the first 2.1 entry. It's still very much the same game. We're not changing the math, for example, right? We're not changing any of the core structures of this. We're just going through and we're making it easier for people to get into the game. And then we're looking at these classes and we're looking at where can we shine this up? Where do we maybe just have room to add a little bit more? I know one of the things that we talked about as we were looking at the fighter was like, is there a fighting style that the fighter has here that's under-supported? Is, the fighter kind of basic buckets of freehand, two-hand, sword and board, archery? Are any of these missing pieces that the other one have? Is there a style we didn't think about that maybe we could slot in here? And those are the kind of questions we ask for, every single one of these classes as we go through, with the end goal being that this should feel like the best version of the same class that you've seen so far.
Okay, and those, I know it's already been announced, or it was stated in Jason Bullman and Logan Bonner's conversation that's available on the Paizo YouTube channel, that I think there's like 4 classes that you really took a good look at, right? Witch, Oracle, and Alchemist, and
Champion.
Yeah. And Champion's probably, I'm guessing, mostly because of the alignment.
Yeah, it has a lot more to do with the removal of alignment than issues with the class itself. The champion is actually, like, very good at doing the thing that it is designed to do. That doesn't mean we're not going to look for some opportunities can we splash a little more hotness in there since we've got the file open and everything anyways, right? But, we're probably not going to change any of the fundamental structures of that class very significantly. It's
Mm-hmm.
going to be a lot more about adjusting it to the new environment and looking for, is there anything we can do here to make this even more exciting for the people who already, love it, or who haven't quite found that piece of it that they can grab onto. Maybe we can put a couple extra handholds on there to bring them in. Yeah. The Alchemist, I think, is going to be potentially more complex. Honestly, it's because it's in Player Core 2. It's kind of one of the things we haven't really dug into, but it's also a thing that we have been evaluating pretty much since the beginning of the edition. The Alchemist has been pretty polarizing since day
Mm-hmm.
one. It is very good at the thing that it does, but the thing that it does is not necessarily always the thing that people want it to do. And so I think as we open that class up and we get deeper into it, that's going to be one of those questions: is how do we bridge that gap, right?
Well, I know I've got one player who is an Alchemist fan, and she's going to be very happy to see any tweaks that are coming her way for that class.
Yeah, I think we'll incorporate a lot of the errata that we've already got out there, get it all centralized, in this new fresh printing. And I strongly suspect, I can't make any promises or say anything specifically, but I strongly suspect that there are a few opportunities to make things work there in a way that people will be even happier with than they currently are.
All right. Awesome. Well, look forward to seeing that. Another thing that came through the questions was about changes to focus points and the way that refocusing is going to work. Again, going back to that interview between Jason Bullman and Logan Bonner, they made reference to the fact that that's changing and that refocusing was going to be, quote, easier. Can you share any more about the changes coming there?
Yeah. So there are, if you currently play any of the focus point classes, especially classes like the monk and the champion, they have these feats that come in. I want to say at 12th and 16th level, but I might be off, a level range up
Mm-hmm.
or down on those. And they're kind of like really boring, but also really essential feats, because they're the feats that allow you to regain extra focus points when you rest, right? And there's also a little confusion about, like, does every feat that gives you a focus spell give you a focus point, or is
Yes.
it only some of them? And so kind of addressing those pain points where focus points don't feel good, that is kind of what our focus
Mm-hmm.
is on here, is making sure that it is very clear how you get focus points, what gives you focus points, that is a standard that applies to all of the options that present them, and also looking for ways to make recovering your focus points sexier and not feel like high level feat taxes where you're like,
Mm-hmm.
man, do I take this super awesome feat that allows me to like do a triple wall jump followed by a 200-foot elbow drop, or do I take the one that lets me regain a second focus point when I rest for 10 minutes? Like we want to make those choices feel a lot sexier and not like, oh, do I take the mechanically boring thing that lets me keep
Right.
doing what I'm doing, or I take the really cool thing? We want everything, or as much of the things as we can possibly manage to feel cool, and like you're not just checking boxes or filling in things on the character sheet. So I think people will be really happy with these focus point changes, and mostly it's just removing things that kind of annoyed people or that weren't very popular inherently to begin with, right?
Okay. Yeah, and I know from my role here with a YouTube channel that's focused on rules, people often send me questions about how does this work, and I try my best to answer them. But one of those questions that keeps coming up again and again and again is, can you tell me exactly when I get another focus point, in this situation or that or that? And I think a lot of people out there are going to be very happy to have it clarified in black and white so that that's no longer a point of confusion.
Yeah, I expect that will be happy for people, and hopefully it will mean that the new people coming in who pick up this book don't run into that same point of frustration or confusion. So
Awesome. Next question that came through the Reddit had to do with deciding what goes into each of the books, each of the four remasters. Because it seems like some things that people thought of as being core, like the Alchemist, because it was in the original core rulebook, is now in Player Core 2, which people think of somewhat as being more like the Advanced Player's Guide. And there's been a whole, like I said, it's a remix. So we're moving things around, and some things may not be where it was before. Can you share what the design process was for determining what items, what ancestries, and what classes and so forth are going into Players Core 1 versus Core 2?
Yeah, so there were a lot of factors that kind of came into play with that decision, and we were moving classes around between books as we were developing the pagination for quite a while into the process, and there started being kind of like hard lines that made it really clear what needed to go where. One of the things that we've already announced is that chromatic and metallic dragons are kind of being shifted to the background because those, have strong ties to the OGL.
Mm-hmm.
And we're bringing in some new dragons into the game to, fill the holes that those leave behind. I kind of hate calling them holes because if you still have a bestiary, right, it's still going to be there. If you use Archives of Nethys, metallic and chromatic dragons are still going to be on Archives of Nethys. They're just not going to be a thing we're focusing on going forward. But we still want dragons at certain level ranges, and this is honestly an opportunity to like really innovate and kind of come up with some cool ideas and stuff. I was first introduced to metallic and chromatic dragons when I read Dragonlance when I was like 8 years
Sure.
old,
Yeah.
which was a good 3 decades ago, right? And they haven't super changed a lot since then. They kind of had one big change in fourth edition that they then kind of reverted back quite a bit on, in
Hmm.
fifth edition. And the versions in Pathfinder kind of trace their roots back to 3.5 and everything. So bringing in these new dragons meant that we were going to want the classes that have draconic inspirations to be able to speak to them. So that meant knowing what the dragons were and how they worked first. And so that meant that the barbarian, which has a dragon instinct, the
Mm-hmm.
sorcerer, which has a dragon bloodline, kobolds, which are heavily dragon influenced, right? All of these things were going in player book 2 because we needed to have enough time to get the dragons done first to know what kind of options and influences we could add to those. And then once that piece was kind of locked into place, that started informing, okay, well, then what can go with this and what can go elsewhere? With the Alchemist, it was like we want to take a good hard look. You can't look at the Alchemist without looking at the entirety of alchemical items, right?
Right.
And so that was immediately like, if we're going to do this on this timeline, that goes in player core too. you know? And so it kind of started with, as we started realizing what we were definitely going to do, what we definitely wanted to do, and what kind of the best ways to do it were, that started separating things out. And then we started bringing in kind of secondary and tertiary metrics. Is there a good gender balance among the iconics in
Hmm.
this book? I think they actually kind of work out in perfect splits across both books. And that was not entirely a coincidence, but it kind of happened before we did it intentionally, just because of other choices we made along the way. And just things like that. There were so many different factors, and sometimes there would be a class that was like, oh, it could go here, it could go here, and ultimately the totality of the changes we were making meant that there was kind of one logical place that everything fit in the end.
Okay. Good, good. I appreciate that insight, and I also just want to lead back to what you were saying about the dragons. And I know a lot of people feel very passionate about metallic dragons and chromatic dragons, because I, like you, grew up on Dragonlance and so on and so forth. Even though, like I said, they're not going away, there's not going to be the focus anymore, but the focus is now going to be based on the magical traditions. Right, so we're going to have arcane, divine, primal, and occult
Dragons,
dragons.
correct.
Uh,
I think I know we've already announced a couple of them. Like the
Omen.
Mirage Dragon is going to be an occult dragon. It's got ties to spirits and illusions and things like that. The Diabolic Dragon is, I
Mhm.
believe, the Divine Dragon. Literally has the divine power of hell behind it, and
Yeah.
in its breath weapon and stuff like that. And so I think these dragons will feel a lot more like Pathfinder dragons, because they will be a thing that organically grew from our world and lore, and not something that we kind of inherited and kept because we knew people would instinctively recognize it thanks to decades of cultural zeitgeist.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I know I'm going to have to wait until Paizo kind of get a lot of the good answers, but I am very much looking forward to seeing how all of that shakes out. Next question that came through that's on our list is about shields and runes. There've been ever since the release of second edition, there's been talk of and a desire in the community maybe to have a rune-based method of progressions for shields, especially the concept of having a sturdy rune to apply to shields and move that into a rune-based way of managing enhancements to shields. What's coming in the remaster for shields and runes, or maybe I should ask, is there anything coming in that area?
So we've talked about my role in the remaster, and I mentioned that doing design work is also part of that. I did work in the shield sections. I have read many a forum post on how people
Yes.
feel about shields. So I'm going to give three facts, and people might feel like they're a little bit misleading or a bit of a tease, but the final answer to this question is going to wait for PaizoCon. Those three facts are: sturdy shields are still in the book. There is not a rune called sturdy, but we did change the way that shields progress through the game to create more options for people who are very focused on, I really want to be using a shield and using shield block, and feel like I can do that with a shield without having it, a cool magical shield or whatever, without having it blow up.
Okay, so at least we can say interesting tweaks are coming to those who like their sword and board fighting.
Yes.
All right, the next question I think is going to be a big one for folks out there. What is the plan with changes to alignment damages? We got no alignment anymore. There already exist alignment damages. We know from the previous conversation that there's going to be holy and unholy damage that's no longer attached to alignment because alignment doesn't exist anymore, so we can't say anything's mechanically good or mechanically evil. But the previous conversation with Jason and Logan, I don't think really got into the other half of the pre-existing alignment spectrum. We currently have lawful damage and we have chaotic damage. Is there anything that's going to be happening with those?
So this is again going to be a little bit of a tease answer, in that to get the full picture, you're going to need to check out the things we have to say about Pathfinder Remastered at PaizoCon. But I'm going to give one important clarification that I'm sure people will talk back and forth about right up until that panel, which is that holy and unholy are not damage types; they are traits that can apply to certain types of damage.
Oh, okay, very interesting. Because I walked away from that previous interview with Jason and Logan as thinking that those were going to be damage types. Okay, well, right there's going to be some fodder for conversation on Reddit. I have no doubt. So you're moving to traits for holy and unholy. Awesome. Next question that came in is in what ways are the new books going to be friendlier for new players? I think this is again following out from that conversation between Jason and Logan where they said this is going to be easier for new players, but I don't believe they really expounded on how. So what can you share with us from your philosophy and design perspective that is going to make the remaster versions great for new players?
Yeah, so this has been something that we've really been trying to tackle very holistically, right? Point one was, let's get all of the feats for the classes, or at least all of the core feats for the classes. Obviously, we don't have space in these books and the ability to keep them affordable if we grab everything from Lost Omens, for example, right? But let's take all of these 4-line feats for these classes. Let's get them in one book. So if you want to play a fighter, you don't need the core rulebook and the APG. You just need player core 1. Boom, there's your fighter. There's everything that your fighter needs right there in one place. We've also been looking at the presentation. Sometimes there are things where it's like, is bringing up this term after that term actually the thing that's going to be best for the players? Or would it make more sense if we introduced this terminology first over here to kind of, prep the field and then lead into that? That's something like Logan and I were working on the equipment chapter, and we were talking about how can we make the equipment chapter flow really naturally, so that if you've got your player core one and you're building a character and you're like, all right, I've got my fighter, I know what my feats and everything and my ancestry and my background and all of that stuff are. Now I just want to go and get kitted out. Reorganizing that chapter a bit to make it a very smooth process for you, so that you just kind of, as you're flipping through the pages, you should be filling things down. And when you get to the end of the equipment chapter, you should have a full kitted out character. And you didn't necessarily need to do as much page flipping as you sometimes need to do in the current version. I can't promise we were 100% successful with that goal, because different people kind of have different expectations and different things about how they interact with stuff. But the goal was definitely to just make the process of reading the book, making a character, and learning the game be something that the book does as excellent a job of as it possibly can, by making sure terminology is introduced in an order that works, by making sure that we introduce mechanical elements to people in the natural progression that they would want to be looking at those mechanical elements and things like that.
Okay, great. So a great jumping on point for all of our friends who are migrating over from that other game.
Yes.
This is going to be a great opportunity for them and for us vets as well. Let me see our next question here. Okay, so this one I thought was interesting. So there's going to be about, I'm going to say, a 7 or 8 month span that these 4 books are coming out. And you're starting with Player Core 1 and you're ending with Player Core 2. So the conundrum that comes up is, what if I'm playing a catfolk fighter, and this is my character I've been playing the last 2 years, and fighter's going to be in Player Core 1. Catfolk is not going to come out until, Player Core 1 is in November, is July next year, before I get my information for Catfolk. What's your suggestion, your wisdom for managing this gray area of that span of time? Do you just wait until all 4 books are out before you convert your game, or what suggestions do you have?
And this is really kind of that thing that comes down to the, like, it's not a 2.5, right?
Right.
It's the same game. Like my suggestion would be, keep playing your character. When Player Core 1 comes out and you've got the fighter class, bust it open, see if you got any new goodies that you want. Retraining is a core part of the game that we made sure to put in there to empower people, GMs and players alike, to know that if you make a bad choice, you don't have to live with it for the rest of forever or go make a new character. You can swap it in. And I think that's kind of going to be the same thing here. Like we've said, we're not changing the math of the game. We're not going to invalidate characters people were already playing if we can possibly avoid it. So, play your catfolk fighter. When Player Core 1 comes out, review the fighter update, see if there's anything in there that you want to grab. You might not actually have any meaningful changes on your character other than, some slight terminology tweaks, right? Put it into the new character sheet instead of the old character sheet, and you're done, sort of thing. And then do the same thing when the catfolk come out in Player Core 2. You've got a version of catfolk you've been playing with. They will probably look very similar to the version of catfolk that comes out in Player Core 2, just with some updates and brush ups and things like that. Very much kind of the philosophy here is that for people who are brand new to the game, these books should feel like the best possible expression of PF2. For people who are already in the game, if you look at these books and you decide to buy them, it should be kind of a fun, like, ooh, look what they added experience. Um, I right now am playtesting a thing that I can't give you many details on, but it's using a completely current core ancestry with a remaster styled class, and it all clicks together and works just fine. There's not any particular confusion to that. And if you go into like a game store after the remasters are out and they've got an APG but no Player Core 2 or whatever, make your own wise purchasing decisions based on your budget and the kind of purchaser you are, but for me, the kind of person who every time I go into the game store, I'm just a kid in a candy store, right?
Right.
Like I'd pick them up anyways. They're still playable. These things all still work at the table together in a very real, literal, concrete way. It's it's not a new game. I
Yeah, it
I,
doesn't.
I can't say it enough.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like it's going to be a major ordeal. And even though to say November to July sounds like a large amount of time within the span of the years that I plan to be playing Pathfinder, that's probably just going to be a small window of that time.
Yeah.
Now, yeah, so I agree. It probably makes sense that you just tweak what needs to be tweaked or that you want to tweak when the first book comes out, and then you progress as needed. When that first book does come out, we know that okay, the big changes, right? No more ability stats, just having modifiers. That's not a big switch. We've already got the ability modifiers. Who cares if we're no longer using the ability scores? Alignment for like the Catfolk fighter, it probably isn't going to impact that character as much as it probably would other characters like Champion that is tied to alignment. But will that Catfolk fighter select anathemas and edicts, or is that just completely the realm of our divine classes?
That is a thing that we're looking at, bringing out more into the game, right? Like introducing, and now it won't be as hard as with divine classes
Mm-hmm.
necessarily, right? Because with the divine class, an edict and anathema, an edict is a thing that your god is very directly saying, "You go do this." And an anathema from your god is very much the god saying, if you do this, I will cut you off.
Right.
Right? Whereas you might have things like catfolk societies might have edicts and anathemas, either as a broader culture or within individual subcultures, right? There might be things that catfolk in Garand or the Mwangi Expanse have as edicts and anathema that are maybe different than the edicts and anathema of catfolk from Arcadia, for example. I don't actually know if there are catfolk in Arcadia off the top of my head. Like, please do not hold me to
Hey,
that in a future.
in my game there are.
I
So yeah.
I assume there are, but that's actually a piece of lore that I'm not 100% on.
Right.
So
Yeah, it sounds like it's going to be very interesting to see that it's somewhat possibly culturally based and not strictly based on religion and your relationship with a god. Um, yeah, I think this is going to make a lot of people happy because uh, I'm sure my table is not very different from everybody else's, but alignment has been divisive. It's been a divisive
yeah.
issue, and honestly, if you compare the amount of time people at my games argue about it and the amount of time that it actually has a mechanical impact in the game, those two are way lopsided, and it's a lot of
Yes.
discussion and argument that doesn't really have a whole lot of impact on the narrative of the game.
Yeah, I think they are useful shorthands for a variety of things, right? But I think also those shorthands can actually kind of get in the way and obscure things because people tend to form very kind of rigid opinions of like what is lawful evil, and sometimes those are
Hmm.
maybe not as good as if there were a couple character traits and some cultural values that dialed you in a lot more on who this character is and how they act and why they act and what they think, right? And also like you mentioned, it's so divisive because the Jason Bowman, I think he might have even said it in the interview. He's like, I'm just tired of people hearing people argue
Yeah,
about what alignment Batman is. And that's one of the
right.
great ones, right? Because I've heard excellent arguments for every square on the grid when it comes to Batman.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know?
Yes. My favorite Batman role playing game ism is if you were to play Star Wars Saga Edition, Batman's class is Crime Lord. and I will stick to that to my dying day. But we don't need to go down that tangent here. Let's see what's next on our list. Okay, the heritages for the inner plane scions, and I'm probably mispronouncing these. Sylph, Oread, Ifrit, and Undine. Are they keeping their names, or is there going to be some change there?
I am pretty sure that all of those are going to be keeping their names. By and large, those names predate the OGL by
Hmm.
a lot,
Right.
you know, and they kind of generally mean the same thing or the same general concept in those pre D&D, pre OGL presentations as well. So I think kind of the general feeling and assumption there is that those aren't really protectable names or concepts, and there's not really any reason to change them when they mean exactly what they say. You
Good.
know. So yeah, I the world's a crazy place and the books are still in flux. I don't know, a lawyer could kick down the door and be like, no, you guys gotta change it. I don't see that happening though.
Okay.
And we're getting really close to the point where it wouldn't matter if they did, because the books would already be shipping out to be printed.
All right. So those are probably going to be safe for a little while. Another question with regards to alignment has to do with the cosmology. So, you look at alignment as being a mechanical element that is part of the mechanical side of the game, but you also look at alignment as how it impacts the narrative and impacts the setting, because some planes are good, some planes are evil. The alignment language has been used to describe parts of the outer planes. Now that alignment is being removed, how is this going to affect the cosmology of the Golarian setting?
So we're not changing the fundamental cosmology. There might be some names that change because there's too many points of commonality with something claimed in the OGL where we're like, oh, they might actually have a pretty good point about that. But there is still going to be a plane that is, the abyss, that and it has demons, and they are forces of destruction and kind of unbridled vileness, and things like that. And there's still going to be daemons or something that fills that niche of these very entropy focused outsiders who are kind of about nihilism and darkness and things like that. So the cosmology isn't going to change. The idea that these planes exist in opposition to each other, I don't think that's really going to change either. It's just going to be more nuanced and not use that hard 9 alignment grid section anymore, right? There's still going to be angels and archons and azatas and things like that who serve the various aspects of goodness, right? Whether that be a more militant, what we would think of as lawful good kind of goodness, or a more gentle, what we would think of as neutral good kind of goodness, or whatever. Like, the philosophies and the purpose of things is not changing. What's changing is we're pulling out the grid, throwing it away, and allowing for kind of more nuance and expression within the existing cosmology, which is going to remain stable through the remaster process.
Okay. Awesome. And one more question, and this is a question that didn't come from Reddit. It's a question that I have come to ask everybody that is associated with Paizo because I want to get an official answer. And that is, there's a class that is spelled Magus. Now, what is the correct pronunciation? Is it Magus, is it Magus, or is it Magus?
So the majority of the people who, if I have heard say the word at Paizo, and the way that I myself say it, is Magus.
Okay.
Uh, Now, I think the core root word, if you are referring to a member of a priestly caste from ancient Persia, I think the correct pronunciation of that is actually Magus. But I don't know. The class is not that.
Right.
I like Magus because I think it sounds like it has the word magic in it, and I think that's why most of the other people who I know who say it that way say it, and I think that's about as close to an official answer as you'll get
Okay.
until James Jacobs or Luis Loza can override me on that because as creative directors, the lore of the world falls within their purview, and I feel like how do you say Magus is probably ultimately a world lore
Yeah,
answer.
I'm still waiting for a pronunciation guide. How do you pronounce that? I don't know if I've been pronouncing Tian Shaw correctly or if it's a different pronunciation. You guys should just put out like a pronunciation guide. I'd
I am
appreciate it.
on for Tiansha in particular, I am 90% certain that one of the upcoming Tian Sha books actually includes a comprehensive pronunciation
Oh,
guide in
great.
it.
Great, fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Michael. I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us and answer those questions. We are at the end of our allotted time for this conversation. I don't want to hold Michael up any longer because it's still he's on another coast than me. His workday is still going on, even though mine has ended, and every second he spends here with us is a second he's not working on great content for us. So, thank you very much for your time and willingness to be with us.
Thanks so much for having me, Dave. It was really fun.
All right, so that was our time with Michael Sayre. Now, before I end this video, I do also want to just give some attention to another question that was asked on Reddit, which was not about the Pathfinder remaster, but was actually about my channel and me and what I'm going to be doing for the next few months. Because this channel is pretty much devoted to discussing role-playing game rules, especially Pathfinder 2nd Edition rules. I have over 250 Pathfinder 2nd Edition rule videos, and I have no clue how many of those I'm going to have to make all over again because of this remaster project. So, thank you to those who did ask in the Reddit thread, but what's this channel going to be for the next few months? I'm not sure. I have a few ideas. I don't want to just stop making content until November. But at the same time, I'm very hesitant to put out some more rules focused content when those rules may be changing relatively soon. So, a couple of things that I have in mind, and please let me know in the comments if you think any of these are great ideas or share other ideas. But I was about neck deep in making a video all about how to create a character in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, where I walked through the process from A to Z, and as I was creating the character, I'm filling out the character sheet right there with you, following along, and I'm not going to put that video out now. I just don't think that makes sense with their coming changes to the process of making a character. But what I do plan to do is take the first section of it where I go into things to consider before you start putting pencil on paper, things you need to think about as far as your character's background, what their beliefs are, how they relate to other members of the party. I think I might still put that out because that's probably going to be safe and universal. Other ideas I have are going to be maybe doing overviews of different adventure paths and standalone adventures for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. These would not be reviews because unless I've had time to actually play the adventure or entire adventure path at the table, then I don't feel comfortable giving a review, but maybe a somewhat spoiler-free overview where I just kind of go over what the themes are of the adventure or adventure path, and maybe what the locales are, and what a GM or player might get from it thematically. Might be something that I would do. And other things I've been thinking are either doing a return to the Should You Play series, where I introduce people to lesser known tabletop role playing games that you might be interested in. and maybe even a side section of that that might be a solo spotlight. I think there's a lot of really fun solo played RPGs that don't get a lot of attention. Maybe I would share some of those with you folks. So if any of those ideas resonate with you, let me know. If you have other suggestions, let me know that in the comments as well. And as always, thank you very much for joining Michael and me for this conversation, and happy gaming!